Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning. And thank you for joining the International Capital Market Association for our webinar on the Asian International Bond Markets, Issuance Trends and Dynamics. My name is Mushtaq Kapasi. I'm Managing Director and Chief Representative for Asia Pacific for the International Capital Market Association. I'm here with my colleague, Tsang, a director in the Asia Pacific office. We're very happy to have the support of the HKMA for both the report that we have launched as well as the webinar. And very shortly, I'll hand over to the Head of Market Development for HKMA, Georgina Lok, for introductory remarks. Before I do that, I'd like to just share with you a few logistical details about this webinar. After we've heard from Georgina, I'll be joined by Tsang, my colleague, and we'll discuss the findings of the report. This section of the webinar will be about 30 minutes long. Please note that your line will be on mute during the entire call. However, we will be taking questions and we welcome them. If you have a question that you'd like to ask us about the report, please feel free to submit this using the Q&A box, which is in the toolbar at the foot of your Zoom screen. We hope to answer it at the end of the main presentation. Also, please note that this call is being recorded. It will be available on ICMA's website after the webinar if you'd like to re-listen or if you'd like to share it with any interested colleagues or stakeholders. So thank you again for joining. And with that, I'll hand over to Georgina Lok. Georgina, welcome.
Thanks, Mushtaq. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Hong Kong. I'm Georgina from the Market Development Division of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. It is a great pleasure to be here today for the launch of ICMA's report on Asia's international bond markets. On behalf of the HKMA, I would like to congratulate ICMA on the 5th edition of the report, with a special focus this year on primary market issuance dynamics in the region's international bond markets. I would also like to thank the ICMA team, Mushtaq, Alex, and Chris in particular, for the impressive work on the report. It is encouraging to see that after 2 years of subdued issuance in 2022 and 2023, we have seen a rebound in issuance volume of international bonds in Asia. Thanks to the support from many of you joining us today, I'm happy to see that Hong Kong has regained its position as the leading location for arranging international bond issuance from Asian issuers, accounting for 30% of the activity. ICMA has been a close partner to us for many years, providing valuable insights and advice on potential ways to further enhance Hong Kong's role as an international financial center and go-to fundraising hub. We've worked together closely on a number of different initiatives, and as always, we are grateful for ICMA's strong support. A prime example is the adoption of tokenization technology in the bond market. As the execution agent of the Hong Kong SAR government's bond programs, the HKMA has embarked on the tokenization journey with Project Genesis in 2021, through which we tested out the concept of tokenized green bonds in Hong Kong. Since then, we have taken the concept further into real market transactions and issued 2 tokenized bonds, one in 2023 and another in 2024. Taking into account market feedback along the way, we have sought to build in standardization elements in our second issuance in 2024. By adopting ICMA's bond data taxonomy to the tokenized bond, we try to pave way for the further automation and cross-system interoperability as this machine-readable language becomes more widely adopted across the market. As we continue our tokenization journey, we look forward to more collaboration opportunities to promote wider market adoption. As highlighted in this year's report, Asian international bond markets have significant potential for future expansion. Besides technology adoption, we also see green and sustainable finance being an important driver, despite what we sometimes see in news headlines around the world. As evidenced by the 17% year-on-year growth in sustainable bond issuance volume in 2024, the momentum in the region is strong. At the HKMA, we are committed to sustainability and launched the Sustainable Financial Action Agenda last October to set out a vision of Hong Kong's role in supporting sustainable development in the region and beyond. Looking ahead, We will continue to work closely with ICMA and many others who are here today to further enhance Hong Kong's financial platform, such that we can continue to play our part in supporting the growth of Asia's bond market. Thanks once again for inviting me to this webinar today, and I look forward to speakers' insights in the discussions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgina. Really appreciate the kind remarks. And we are also delighted from ICMA's perspective to have the honor to work with HKMA on these very important market development activities, not just in the primary markets, but also in the secondary markets, collateral markets, digital assets, and sustainable finance. So thank you once again for your support and your encouragement and inspiration in the markets. Okay, now we will get into the presentation itself, but if you'll allow me a couple of minutes just to introduce ICMA for those who may not be familiar or who may not be familiar with the wide scope of our work. So we're the International Capital Market Association. We are an international organization that has been in existence for more than 50 years and with over 600 institutional members across all areas, all parts of the spectrum of the debt capital markets, from issuers to intermediaries to investors and all other providers, infrastructures, law firms, credit rating agencies, and other participants in the market. So we truly do represent the overall debt capital markets in the international space. We define our work through three main verticals, three main segments of the market. Those are primary markets, where we are well known for our primary market handbook, which governs best practices in debt syndication markets in the international space. Then secondary markets, where we also publish rules and recommendations for secondary market trading that are the leading best practices for secondary market trading operations and other aspects of the trading rules. Thirdly, we have the repo and collateral market practice, where we run the GMRA, the Global Master Repurchase Agreement, which is the leading master agreement for repo markets. And also, I would say we're the leading market association in terms of expertise in understanding the dynamics, the size, the direction of travel, and regulations involved in the global repo and collateral markets. Next, we have two cross-cutting themes that cut across all three of these areas. One is sustainable finance, which many of you will be familiar with. We're very fortunate to be the manager and the secretariat for the green and social bond principles and related guidance, including most recently sustainability-linked bond principles and transition finance handbook, which is incredibly important for the Asia-Pacific region today. We also publish a number of guides and other technical reports related to sustainable finance, regulation, and issuance. And last but certainly not least, our newest cross-cutting theme is fintech and digitalization, which is focused on digital bonds and the emerging technologies involved in how bonds can be more efficient, potentially more safe, less risky, less costly, with the use of new technologies such as DLT. And of course, our work with HKMA has been extremely interesting and in some ways market leading as well. And we appreciate the cooperation with them. So let's move on to the next slide, where we'll get into the actual findings of the report. Just very quickly, want to clarify the scope of the report, just so everyone understands exactly what's covered and what's not. So this is the international bond markets in Asia. So in simple terms, this would be bonds that are issued by governments or corporates in a jurisdiction that are offered outside of that jurisdiction. That's really all. It's just issuance that is cross-border in nature. And these are all dealogic data that are defined by dealogic. And you can look at the report in more detail for a bit more specifics on the actual methodology. But the basic idea is that it's cross-border issuance, not domestic issuance in any currency by any issuer. Let's move on. Okay, now to the actual headline data. Now, although issuance volumes were subdued or were decreased in 2022 and 2023, as you can see from the chart. Again, these are overall issuance numbers from Asia cross-border. And by the way, this does include Japan. it excludes Australia as part of Oceania under geologic methodology. So after a couple of years of more subdued issuance, 2023 was a slight increase. We have seen a more significant rebound in 2024. Actually, it was a 20% rise year on year, and the issuance volume from 2024 was approximately 460 billion US dollar equivalents. We'll go into a bit more detail about the actual breakdown by country, but as we'll see, China still remains the largest issuer from a national point of view, followed by Japan and Korea, although ASEAN is quite significant, and India has actually increased significantly this year, although the overall issuance volume of international bonds remains somewhat small. The other chart we'd like to highlight, and we find this quite interesting, is the proportion of international to total bond issuance. Now, what this actually means is you take the overall issuance from a particular country, both domestic and international. Right? How much of that issuance is international issuance? In other words, what proportion of the total bonds issued in a country are going cross-border? And what we see is that in Asia, the percentage, that share, is much, much less than it is for the rest of the world. Actually, in Asia, international bonds made up 14% of total bond issuances by Asian issuers compared to the global share of 41%. So there are many reasons for this, and we're not necessarily saying that the Asian share should be that high. There are some good reasons why it is lower, but we still think it's a notable data point, and that there is certainly more opportunity for the bond market to continue to internationalize. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, now just a brief overview of the bond issuance by deal nationality. And you'll see very interestingly at the top of the left chart, you see a bit of a sliver for other. And there are actually a number of different countries that are not named specifically in this slide, but more frontier markets that have had international bond issuances. And you can look at the report itself to find out more about those. But we've just included for clarity the main countries of issuance. As mentioned earlier, the total is 460 billion. There's 141 billion from China. That's up 29%. From Japan, 122 billion. Korea, 64 billion. ASEAN, 77 billion. And India, 13 billion, but up significantly from that. One other headline data point that I'd like to mention, which we'll get into a little more detail later in the webinar, is that 21% of the total offshore bond issuance is sustainable in nature. And this percentage is much higher than the global average for international bonds, but also much higher than the global average overall. And so we think this is quite interesting because it shows that for international issuance from Asia, for issuers who are going into the global markets, actually sustainability is a very important part of that market. And sustainability is, we would think from the data, would be very attractive to international investors that may not otherwise be interested in Asian names. So again, the causation is not exactly clear, but the data point that such a large proportion of the international issuance from Asian issuers is sustainable is actually quite remarkable to us. Okay, now I'll hand it over to Alex Tsang for the next slide on deal nationality.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mushtaq. Yeah, do you mind muting it? Yeah. So thank you, Mushtaq and Georgina, for the introduction. So now I would like to talk about the Asian international bond issuance landscape by jurisdiction. So I would like to first start with China, which contributed the most of the issuance of Asian international bond by dual nationality at 31%. So in terms of volume, we see from Chinese issuers actually rebounded in 2024, this year, to about 140 billion US dollar, which actually increased by 30% year on year. So to further drill down by industry breakdown, rank in descending order of issuance volume. We see that the financial, the industrial, real estate, and the government sectors remain to be the most active, basically collectively accounting for over 85% of total issuance volume this year. So within the financial sector, top issuers that we are seeing is the AIIB, the big four commercial banks of China, and also other Chinese policy banks, such as the China Development Bank, and also the Export-Import Bank of China. So we also, that's one point that we can stress on, that is that we also see the IT sector actually saw a rise in the issuance activity this year. So basically, in 2023, it was just a mere contribution of 1%, but now it actually increased to 5% this year. So particularly, we see that offshore convertible bonds issued by Chinese funded technology enterprises actually gained a significant traction this year, which is largely driven by large-scale issuances from major international internet companies from China.
Alex, could you comment a little bit more on the Chinese offshore credit bond markets in terms of some of the sectors that had decreased previously?
Yeah, sure. Well, I may not be able to really provide a quantitative analysis on this for now, but I think I guess high-level qualitative summary will be sufficient to answer this. So I think the gist is that financial bonds actually remained the largest portion of offshore credit bond issuance this year, driven largely by debt rollovers under a maturity wall, which is quite big. And we also see a higher share of offshore issuances from LGFVs. But having said that, real estate bonds actually saw a year-on-year decline due to, I would say, reduced refinancing demand and also weaker debt raising capacity of some of the Chinese real estate companies. Yep. So I will now turn to Japan. So moving to Japan, which actually contributed 26% of total Asian international bond issuance this year, which is behind China's, which is at 31%. We see actually moderate year-on-year growth in issuance volumes for Japan, reaching over 120 billion US dollar this year, increasing 7% year-on-year. So this growth rate is actually, if we compare that to other Asian jurisdictions, for example, India, ASEAN, and China, is actually slightly slower, given that India actually grew at 55%, 53%, ASEAN at 37%, and China at 29%. So, but we can see that consistently throughout the years, the financial sector has been driving international bond issuance from Japan. So this year, within the financial sector, we see leading issuances from credit corporations based outside Japan, providing auto financing and also leasing services to customers, commercial banks, and also Chinese development banks, such as the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, and also Development Bank of Japan, and also LIFES. So that's actually that we can drill a bit into why the Japan's issuance actually rebound last year in 2023. So basically, there can be many factors, driving behind such a rebound, including external macro factors and also, strategic consideration at an issuer level. But I would say that one of the key factors behind that was that at that time, it was quite favorable from a funding cost perspective for Japanese issuers to actually swap their foreign currency debt back into domestic currency debt. Okay, so now I'll be going to next slide. So now we turn to ASEAN countries. We actually observe similar trends of rebound, with issuance volume from ASEAN rebounded to reaching 77 billion US dollar this year, which actually, as I mentioned before, is increasing at 37% year on year. And that increase is largely driven by issuances from the financial sector as well. As you know, as the delegates know here, that ASEAN is actually composed of multiple member states. I guess it is also worthwhile diving into the analysis at a more granular country level. And indeed, since 2006, the Philippines, Singapore, and also Indonesia have been the major international bond issuing jurisdiction within ASEAN. So together, they have consistently accounted for at least 75% of the total issuance volume, with their combined shares actually reaching a record high of 95% this year, which is the largest proportion since 2006. So among all these three jurisdictions, the Philippines was the largest contributor this year, representing 54% of the total issuance volume from ASEAN. But I think it's important to actually caution out this at this point that the majority of international bond issuances from the Philippines, at least in our study, was actually coming from issuances from the Asian Development Bank, which is actually headquartered at Manila. Okay, now I would like to turn to South Korea. So just reading by the data, so international bond issuances from South Korea actually grew to a record high of 64 billion US dollar this year, predominantly led by, also we've seen in other Asian jurisdictions, by the financial institution. So that actually what it entails is that actually covers issuers such as auto captive companies and also obviously commercial banks, as well as development banks and also government-owned corporation, which are perceived to have strong fundamentals and also offer attractive yields relative to their credit risk.
Now, Alex, just noticing from the chart, I mean, it does seem that South Korean issuance has been in some ways more resilient than other countries, and particularly the rebound from 2022 to 2023. We did do some research on this over the last couple of years. Maybe you can give a little bit more detail on that, please.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what's important to highlight is that from an issuance volume standpoint, compared to other Asian jurisdictions, international bond issuance from South Korea has actually demonstrated quite I would say, remarkable resilience. So to put this in numbers, right, back in 2023, while most of the Asian jurisdictions, generally speaking, experienced a drop in issuance volume, issuance volume from South Korea actually increased by 31% year on year to approximately 60 billion US dollar, which is again driven by strong issuances from the financial sectors. So that 2023 issuance number actually was the then historical high number for South Korea, only to be exceeded by this year's volume at 64 billion US dollar. So again, I guess some of the comments that we can make is that issuances from Korean development banks and also government-owned corporation are normally quite sought after by investors globally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. Let me just move to India. So in line with the broader regional trend, we see this year the issuance actually grew to 13 billion US dollar. But by viewing it from a longer time period, right, issuance volume was quite volatile and could be heavily impacted by credit events in the domestic market. So for instance, that example would be in 2018. So having that said, what should be noted is that although the absolute issuance volume of international bond from India was not the highest, but it actually rebounded the most by 53% year on year this year compared to other Asian jurisdictions. So now I've finished analyzing the Asian international bond market by jurisdiction. So let me further present by maybe focusing on other key dimensions of the Asian international bond markets. So that basically covering the location of arrangement, debuts, issuances, currencies, and also tenor breakdown. Okay, let me first start with the main location of arrangement. So as mentioned, as you can see on the screen, basically in this analysis, we are essentially breaking down the total issuance volume of Asian international bonds by the location of arrangement. I guess the big picture of this is that the dominance of the US and the UK, I guess, has combined the key hubs for arranging Asian international bond issuances, has actually declined over the years. So more specifically, just to put that in numbers, right? The combined shares actually fell from around 80% in 2006 to just over 40% this year by issuance volume. But incidentally, we are seeing that Asia, I would say, already having emerged as another key hub for arranging, as a key location for arrangement. So approximately arranging 35% of total issuance volumes over the past 4 years, from a low single digit in 2006. I guess another way to see the data is to look at from a single jurisdictional perspective. And under this lens, that we can see that since 2014, Hong Kong has been consistently been the leading location for arranging Asian international bonds issuance by volume, only except for year 2023. So this year, around 30% of Asian international bonds were actually arranged in Hong Kong.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And just to make a bit of a methodological point, you do see categories for consortium, which means that it's produced executed in a number of different jurisdictions. So it's maybe best described as many at the same time. And then a little bit of unknown ones due to the nature of the data. But I think the overall conclusion stands with Hong Kong and certainly Asia as a major hub for execution and arrangement of Asian international bond issuances. If you do have more questions about the methodology, please refer to the detailed notes in our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mushtaq. Now I should move on to the next slide. Okay, so moving to analysis of the debut issuance trend. So I guess here a bit of sizing exercise here can be useful to map out the shares of debut issuance to the overall Asian issuance volume. So between 2006 and 24 this year, annual debuts international issuances from Asian issuers actually quite fluctuated, in terms of the issuance volume. So we see that issuance volume actually peaked in year 2017 and actually trended downwards. So with that, in terms of the shares of debut issuance to the overall Asian issuance, that's not a significant upward or downward trend that could be spotted. But instead, between the year 2006 and 24, the debut issuance shares actually, as I mentioned before, fluctuated between 2% and 11% of the total annual issuance volume of Asian international bonds. So to further analysis here is to break it down, the debut issuances by dual nationality. And what we can see that is quite significant that the Chinese issuers have been consistently been the primary source of debut deals in the Asian international bond markets, making up around 63 to 91% of total Asian debut issuances by volume since 2014. In 2023, that year actually marked the China's peak share at 91%, which actually declined to 68% this year. And just to give more color on this, right? This year, a total of around 140 new Chinese issuers actually tapped the market for the first time, with most coming from industrial, real estate, and also the financial sectors. So in connection to this point, right, Hong Kong, apart from being, as mentioned, a leading hub for arranging Asian international bonds, it also leads in terms of arranging debut Asian international bond issuances. So since 2016, it has on average arranged over 70% of such issuances by volume. And in this year, the percentage was 68%, and mostly Hong Kong is arranging for international bond issuances from Chinese issuers. Okay, now I think it's time to move to currency breakdown. So I guess for this slide, the key trend is that, and I guess it's not surprising to many delegates here, issuances, Asian international bond issuances actually didn't, mostly dominated by G3 currencies denomination, which referring to the US dollar, euro, and Japanese yen. So since 2006, G3 issuances on average actually accounted for over 80% of issuance volume, with the average percentage actually rising to 90% between the year 2017 and 2021. However, that number actually dropped to 78% and this year. And the main driver that we analyze is that the issuance in terms denominated in US dollar rate from Asian issuers actually continued to decline over the years, from 83% in 2020 to 67% this year. And in the meantime, we are seeing RMB denomination and also euro denominated issuances stood at 11 and 10% respectively, rising from an average of 6 and 7% since 2011.
Thanks, Alex. Actually, I'd like to just stick with the slide a bit because I actually think this is quite remarkable. And cutting the numbers a little bit differently, a couple of things I noticed. One is that now renminbi issuance has actually exceeded euro issuance slightly, ever so slightly, but still that seems to be a bit of a milestone in the international Asian bond markets. Also, looking at the data conversely, if you look at the non-G3 currency issuance, that number was about 10% from 2017 to 2021. And that number has now gone to over 20%. So if you look at the non-G3 currency issuance, which is mostly renminbi, that has actually doubled over the last few years. So I think this is quite relevant for the internationalization of the renminbi markets and efforts to promote Hong Kong as a renminbi hub, for example. So we may be seeing, I mean, depending, of course, on many other factors, a continued increase in the offshore renminbi issuance. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mushtaq, for the extra colors. I think it's going to be hugely relevant to the audience here. So now to complete the analysis, let me move to next slide to tenor. So in terms of tenor breakdown, bonds with maturity of 1 to 3 years and 3 to 5 years have been the most popular among international bond issuances by Asian issuers in recent years, accounting for 70% of total issuance volume in 2024 this year, continuing actually a similar trend that we observed since 2022. So some may ask that is this a new trend or is this something that is that we are seeing in previous years? So basically, in our analysis, we actually can see more issuances shifted to short to midterms. I would say just recently, since 2022. As mentioned, that on the background of the Fed actually started its high cycle in March 2022. So as compared to data between 2009 and 21, the shares of short to midterms issuances was actually around 50%. So what this denotes is that the Asian issuers may be one of the reasons behind that that increase of issuances in short to midterms is that they simply did not want to take up too much interest rate risk on the back of a quite steep US monetary tightening cycle. So now I would like to pass back to Mushtaq to give us an overview of the Asian sustainable bond markets.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. All right, just a brief overview of ICMA's work in sustainable bond markets, which we talked about a little bit earlier in the webinar. So since 2014, ICMA provides a secretariat for the principles. These are the green and social bond principles, sustainability bond guidelines, combining green and social in a use of proceeds bond, and the sustainability linked bond principles, which are now the standards that underpin the global sustainable bond market. In fact, over 97% of green bonds in the, of sustainable bonds in the market are consistent, aligned with the green, social, and sustainable law and the relevant principles promoted by ICMA and governed by ICMA. Also, since 2023, ICMA has been active providing the secretariat to various codes of conduct for ESG ratings and data product providers. Most recently, in Hong Kong, launched the ESG Code of Conduct, which was the secretariat, which was ICMA, helping to organize the working group of industry participants that put together that ESG Code of Conduct. Please go to our website for more information on that. We're also a member of the ASEAN Industry Advisory Panel, advising on transition finance and taxonomies, and active in many other groups around the region, including the Hong Kong Green Finance Association, to promote regulatory initiatives, topical papers on things like transition finance, greenwashing, and other technical matters. Thanks, Alex. Next slide. Okay, so I'll give a high-level overview of this and then hand over to Alex for a bit more detail. Now, this data is actually from another source, from the LGX Data Hub. But what we try to do here is give a sense of the breakdown of different types of sustainable bonds within the overall universe of sustainable bond issuance. What I mean by that is how much of the sustainable bonds were green, social, sustainability linked out of the total issuance. And what emerges from this analysis is quite interesting. What you can see here on the top line, or the second line under the heading, is that in Asia, much more of the international, this is actually all issuance, much more of the total sustainable issuance is social and sustainability, which combines green and social, although sustainability linked still remains relatively small. You see in other regions, particularly Europe and North America, the proportion of pure green issuance is much larger, which means that in Asia, there's a bit more of an emphasis on social issuance and issuance, of course, that combines both social and green into sustainable. Okay, over to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Mushtaq. Let me just go to the next slide. Okay, so thanks, Mushtaq, for giving us a very, I guess, useful high-level updates on the Asian sustainable bond market landscape. But I would now like to focus more on the international aspect of it, back to the main theme, i.e., international sustainable bond issuances from Asian issuers. So as a high-level overview of the total issuance volume of Asian international sustainable bonds, it basically peaked at $100 billion in 2021. Then it actually declined to around $85 billion in 22 and 23. Then in this year, that number actually rebounded to around $100 billion this year. So what we can actually see from this is that the current issuance volume is actually quite close to the peak level achieved in 2021. And on the right side, we can see a breakdown of the total issuance volume by dual nationality. Essentially, I guess what we can see is that the Chinese issuers again led international sustainable bond issuances in Asia by contributing 43% of total issuance volume this year. Actually, a strong rebound from last year at 30% and just below the peak as 47% in 2016. And what needs to be mentioned on the right side of the breakdown is that Japan and also Korea is also one of the main combined driving forces behind. This year, the combined forces by Japan and also Korean issuers shares actually dropped to 25%. However, that compared to the period from 19 and also 23. They actually combinedly contribute an average of 37% of annual total issuance volume. So it's just that in this year, their contribution slightly actually drops. But in terms of the absolute contribution in terms of shares, it's still quite significant. Okay. Now I turn to last but not least, I guess I would like to touch upon this, another very interesting finding, I would say. So basically what we are doing here is to compare the shares of international sustainable bond issuance from Asia and also globally, that actually excluding Asia, to the total international bond issuance this year.
And Alex, sorry, here we're back to Dealogic data. So this is the original data set on international issuance from Asian issuers.
Yeah. Thank you for Mushtaq for supplementing that. So by doing this analysis, what we can see is that the shares of Asian international sustainable bond issuance to the total issuance volume from Asia was higher than the global level, as mentioned by Mushtaq in the very beginning of the presentation, standing at 21% versus the global ex-Asia share at 9%. So looking at the more sort of a recent development, Asia shares actually increased from 7% in 20 to more than 20% of issuance volume since 2022. So I guess one objective fact or observation that we can see is that in this year, 2024, structurally speaking, right, sustainable issuance actually carried more weight in Asia than global ex-Asia in terms of having a higher share. But having that said, in terms of total issuance amounts, Asia only saw a total issuance amount of below $100 billion this year, compared to over 600 billion US dollar globally ex-Asia. So that actually suggests that there's still room for more Asian issuances in the international sustainable bond markets. With that note, that actually marks the end of our presentation. So I guess we can move to Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. So we do have some questions, and we welcome more. So please put them in the chat. We may not have time to answer all of them, but we'll do our best, and we'll leave the webinar open until we've been able to answer as many as we can. So first of all, maybe one for you, Alex, if you don't mind taking it. Are there any industry themes or particular types of company for debut issuers over the years or recently? Any drivers behind this that we might be aware of to help explain the motivations for these issuers to come to the market?
Yeah. So basically what we can see from debut issuances, right? As mentioned in the China analysis, we actually has the sort of industry breakdown of the debut issuance from China, and we are seeing sectors such as let me just go back to the slide a bit. Yeah. So as mentioned before, we can see that for debut issuances, that's going to be real estate, industrial, and also from financial sectors as newcomers from Chinese onshore issuances tapping the market for the first time. So I think for that dynamics, it's actually from China with that sectoral breakdown coming into the markets. And also, as mentioned, China actually made up quite a significant part of the debut issuances in terms of the total shares. So I guess in terms of debut issuance, that's going to be another remarkable year for China in terms of that perspective.
Yeah, actually, I think this question is very good, and just as I was looking at the data in the report myself, I realized this might be a good topic for further and deeper analysis in the future. So we might look at that as well, because I think one thing that would be quite interesting to see more is what are the trends of the different sectors of debut issuance, both in China and across different jurisdictions over time. So that's something that I think our data would, in theory, be able to address, and it's quite a good idea. One other comment is that I just noticed that there were over 170 debut issuers from China in 2024, which actually seems somewhat remarkable to me. Maybe in an economy the size of China, that isn't very significant in terms of the number of companies, but it does seem to be a step to issue bonds in the international market, and the fact that we've had that many, largely from the industrial sector, do so is still, I think, a notable data point. So I think we would want to be following this a little bit more in future. Okay, so let me look at the questions that we have now. Okay, we have one more. I'm curious about the reasons why South Korea has been able to rebound more strongly than other Asian countries, achieving a record high in bond issuance that surpasses previous levels. While other countries are recovering, they have not exceeded their previous issuance volumes. What factors have enabled South Korea to recover so significantly? Yes, thank you for this question. First of all, a very large caveat that we at ICMA are not particularly experts on the South Korean market, and I think we would invite you to talk to your local expert on the market in-house or in outside, perhaps. But what we can say, let me make a couple of comments on that. First of all, maybe a bigger picture comment, which is that I do want to caution when you look at this data, this may not necessarily represent the overall health of the bond market or of the economy, because remember, this is international bond issuance. This actually does not count the domestic bond issuance. While we think it's significant, of course, enough to produce our report, and we think it's a good sentiment of international investor interest in the onshore market, as well as onshore issuer interest in funding from the offshore markets. I think that's very much what the data is showing, but it's not necessarily showing the overall health of the economy, nor is it necessarily showing the total amount of borrowing within an economy, because there can be other asset classes. There can be, of course, commercial lending, and now perhaps more and more, even private credit, for example. So just keep that in mind. But with that, maybe I hand it over to Alex a little bit to go into perhaps some of our qualitative findings, just from our high-level research on why the South Korean cross-border market has remained resilient.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I
I
can
guess
actually
actually
analyze it by two standpoints. So firstly is that throughout the years, we can see international bond issuance from South Korean issuers have largely been underpinned by the financial sector. So we've been seeing quite strong momentums from within the financial sectors of South Korea, including, as I mentioned before, commercial banks, and also development banks from South Korea, and also government-owned corporations, South Korea, continuing issuing in the international bond space throughout the years. So basically, that's one factor that we have to mention. And second is that from the investor side, right? Normally, Korean credits are quite eagerly sold by investors in Asia and also globally, because basically Korean credits, normally talking about issuance from government-related bodies, right? People see it having a quite a strong economic fundamentals, and also I would say Korean government sectors are quite generous in terms of the pricing that investors may actually find quite attractive to subscribe to those securities, and that large investor base actually underpin the continuous issuance trend from financial sectors of South Korea. I guess that's two factors that I can mention that why we can see that South Korean issuance in the international bonds space has remaining quite remarkably resilient throughout the years.
Okay, we have another question, which is frankly the question I was dreading, which is how will the U.S. geopolitical situation impact Asian international bond issuance this year?
Yeah.
Now, I will not be able to answer this in great detail, not only because I cannot tell the future, even though I am an American following all this closely, but also because there are just too many dynamics here at stake, and I think I would leave it to the expert economists and the political scientists to try to predict some of the big picture geopolitical factors that will play out in the markets. But maybe I can just make a couple of observations very generally, which might be relevant to this question. First of all, one thing that we found from our previous research over the years is that among all the different factors in the levels of issuance, especially over the last couple of years, and one of them driving the decline in issuance from 2021 to 2022 in particular, was simply global rates. So a lot of it just comes down to economics, quite frankly. When you have an issuer that's offshore in an Asian jurisdiction, trying to look at whether offshore issuance in, let's say, a G3 currency is, which is still the majority of the international issuance, whether that is more economic or less economic. And when rates are very low, it becomes very attractive. Internationally, when rates are very high, it becomes much less attractive. And issuers, even if they have funding or refinancing needs, will largely go to other funding markets onshore, perhaps, or commercial lending to meet their funding needs when it just doesn't become as attractive from a pure fiscal perspective. So if we look at the factors in the market, from the U.S. Political situation and the economy that affect that affect rate setting from the U.S. Treasury, for example, increases in those rates will make international issuance less attractive, and we've seen that is a factor in overall volumes. So I think I would just stop there and give that as the main takeaway to watch here. Thank you. Okay, we have one more question, and then I think we will close. And this one might be more for Alex. So the report highlights that China has been driving growth in the Asian international bond market over the years. How do you see the Chinese market evolving this year? And what will be the potential impact on international bond issuance? Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, that's actually quite a lot within the questions already, and I guess it actually comes down to many factors, right? Both externally from a macroeconomic perspective, and also internally at an issuer level, they may have their own strategic plans of the issuance timeline and all that. But I guess one good way to tackle this problem is to actually look at some of the key messages coming out from the recently concluded 2 sessions in Beijing. Hopefully that can help to provide some pointers to this question. So basically, there are many key messages coming out from 2 sessions in Beijing, but there may be worthwhile highlighting some of them. So first is the growth outlook. So at this year, the growth outlook, the growth target was actually set at 5% this year, supported by increased fiscal deficit. That's one key message that we get from the 2 sessions in Beijing. So what this means is that what's important to drill down on this point is the fiscal deficit target for this year was actually raised from 3% of national GDP to 4%, with actually coming up with also higher bond issuance targets. So let me just try to recall, the exact numbers on this one. So in terms of the special local government bond issuance, that target was actually increased to RMB 4.4 trillion from 3.9 trillion, if I remember correctly. And also the ultra long-term bond issuance actually was targeted to raise from RMB 1 trillion to 1.3 trillion. So I guess with all this, right, what we can conclude is that there will be a stronger fiscal policy push by China that is expected in this year, potentially leading to higher sovereign and also government bond debt issuance from China, coming from China. also an important factor to look at is obviously monetary policy, right? And I guess one key message to see is that the direction of the monetary policy coming out from two sessions is that, as announced during the session, the monetary policy of China, the direction of it actually shifted from prudent to moderately loose. So this actually was this change. I mean, initially actually signaled at last December Central Economic Work Conference, actually marked the first major policy shift of China since 2011. So under this, I guess, policy signal, right, with potential onshore interest rates declining further, we may see increase in onshore CMY issuance and also offshore CNH issuances, because obviously, there's going to be a shrinking pricing gap between the two markets, because these two markets are actually, undergoing increasing connectivity. That actually can actually fuel issuances from China. And another key point to highlight is that China actually now focusing on the new quality productive factors, right, as to develop the Chinese market further. So it actually, what this means by new quality productive factors, right? There can be many definitions of it, and many people interpret it differently. But I guess it can, from my perspective, right, it can broadly refer to the incremental productivity gains freed from China's traditional growth model. Essentially, we can try to understand it by saying that China actually focus more on, emphasizing on high tech, high efficiency, and also high quality development. So there is already continuous efforts to actually strengthen advanced manufacturing and also the futures industries. As a result, in this year, we may see more issuances from these sectors, entering into the international bond markets, which obviously, as I mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, that actually will be subject to, internal issuer level strategic decisions. So yeah, so by grouping some of the key messages from the two sessions, hopefully some insights can be actually drilled from the two sessions, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm afraid we're almost out of time and we have several more questions. So thank you for the very good questions. I wish I could answer them all, but let's just take one more. We appreciate your questions, and we'll either try to answer them offline, or you can feel free to email us, actually. Let me just give you that email. It's apac@icmagroup.org. That's APAC at ICMA Group, ICMAGROUP.org. And we will do our best, and we'd be very happy to take further questions. So just one last one, which is a bit more technical, but I think interesting. The proportion of sustainable to total issuance on the last slide is interesting. And for cases of India, Hong Kong, and China, do you have data on whether these sustainable issuances are more government related or from corporates? We do have that data. I don't have the actual exact breakdown for you in front of me, but what I can say in general is that it is mixed. I think we are seeing some of that issuance is in terms of the offshore sustainable issuance. Some of it is pure government, sovereign. Some of it has been sovereign related. So I'd say agencies of governments, for example, social bonds for housing. One example would be, and then much of it is also from industrials and corporates. So I think it's a little bit idiosyncratic for the jurisdiction, but I think overall for Asia, it is generally a mix of the three. But I appreciate the question, and this is something that we can actually examine a bit further in future analysis. So we are now out of time. I am very sorry. We've run out of time before answering all the questions. Thank you all very, very much for your attention and your interest. If you do have further questions, if you have ideas for further analysis, if you have comments on this webinar or on the report itself, especially if you have corrections or mistakes, we would love to hear those as well. Please feel free to email the Asia team here at APAC at ICMA ICMAgroup.org. You'll also be receiving an email if you registered already with a survey as well as a recording link. So please feel free to give us your comments that way, and please feel free to share the recording as well as the report itself. We reached the hour, so thank you all again very much for your 60 minutes of your time, and we hope to meet you soon and look forward to seeing you for next year's report. Thank you, and have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.